Welcome to the Top Order Podcast. World Test Championship time. Lots and lots going on. Which keeper did India pick? Their side looks more difficult to balance with their bowling options. Warner announcing a 6-month lap of honour. We're going to discuss that. We're going to discuss Josh Hazlewood's injury and Michael Neser coming into the squad. We'll also wrap up England versus Ireland at the home of cricket. All coming up on the Top Order Podcast. Stay tuned. Well, boys, just the three of us here this evening. Raj tied up with a presentation, so we've got a little bit more time on our PowerPoints, haven't we, this evening, to go through various bits and pieces. So we've obviously got the World Test Championship final coming up. We've just seen the first Test match of the English summer at Lords as well from a domestic standpoint, and then it comes thick and fast after that in terms of Test cricket across the Ashes series, which we'll preview on probably next week's show. But I'm sure we are going to talk a couple of little bits of permutations and what this means for the Ashes as we move forward as well, particularly as we wrap up England versus Ireland. But Lippy, I think you wanted to open things up, didn't you, with regard to this World Test Championship final?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've already mentioned the Ashes there, right? So my question is kind of, last time World Test Championship, last time around, it was the first time. It was a novelty. Certainly from a New Zealand point of view, we were really, really into it. We were like, here's our chance, right? Here's our chance to go in and win an ICC event. Second time around, has it lost any luster? I mean, from a New Zealand point of view, certainly like when you look on the Cricket Info site, today was the first day actually that I'd seen the World Test Championship as the number one billing. The last couple of days when I've been looking at, obviously England, Ireland stuff's been playing, but World Test Championship news has kind of been way down the list in terms of like even some of the, bilateral series going on and stuff. So for me, it at least hasn't felt like it's been hyped up as much. But I mean, Baldy, I'll come to you straight away because your side is in it. Is this a big event?
Well, it has to be. So not just because Australia's playing and maybe for New Zealanders, not just because New Zealand isn't playing. This is a big event and it has to be for the success of Test cricket as the ICC see it. So if the ICC are going to have this future tours program and schedule of major, let's call them major events, World Cups and Test Championship finals where there's something on every year, then there has to be emphasis on the World Test Championship final as being a thing. And if we're going to have a protracted series of opportunities to play Test cricket in the future, this has to be the pinnacle, effectively for all cricketing nations, if Test cricket is going to have meaning going forward. So it has to be. It's almost not too big to fail, but I think in the ICC's mind, this is their marquee now Test pinnacle, if you like, and it has to be a success for them. I think you've got two very competitive teams that we're going to preview in this championship. You've got two teams that I think if the ICC were to pick who they'd want to be playing in the final, I think they would pick Australia and India in the final purely for, partisan interest and bums on seats and eyes on TVs in those major nation, i.e. India, but also because there's going to be some very, very competitive and some probably quite abrasive Test cricket being played over 5 or 6 days.
You've given a very PC answer, but you haven't actually answered the question. Do you care about this?
Absolutely, 100%. Absolutely. This is the only World Cup that Australia haven't won, and we're in the final, and we want to win it, and we just got our ass handed to us by India in India not that long ago, and we got our ass handed to us a couple of tours ago in Australia.
Yes.
Absolutely, Australia wants to win this Test match, and Australian cricket fans want their team to win this Test.
I'll pose a question at the end of this. In fact, I'll pose a question now, and then I'll have my say. But would you rather win this than the Ashes in this English summer? So if success of this tour for you, and I'll come back to you on this, but would you rather win this one-off game, which is I guess that sort of culmination of 3 years hard work, or would you rather win the Ashes series? And I'll come back to you on that.
Okay.
Lippy, look, I guess my view on this is as a neutral. I think I can't be completely neutral because it has a little bit of a bearing on the rest of the English summer. But if I kind of take that out of the mix, the disappointing thing for me, and look, this is, we've known this since the start of the schedule.
Yeah.
We've had some question marks around how this all pieces together. England, Australia, India to an extent playing, 18, 19 test matches over the cycle. Other nations playing 9 or 10 test matches in that same cycle, which probably doesn't mean that this is actually a true reflection of the last 3 years worth of cricket.
I would push back on you I do think these are the two best teams. England's obviously been fantastic for the last 12 months, but I would say the course of the 3 years, I think we've probably got the right two sides. I do agree with you that you don't get the reflection because of all the different games.
Don't get the reflection because some teams don't get the ability to play 20 test matches. So, look, I think what I'm saying is the format is flawed.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
And then the secondary component is, if this game peters into a draw, they share the mace. Which, again, when you've put that sort of 3 years worth of work into it, and Border, you've said it's the only world trophy, crown, whatever you want to call it, that you haven't won, then sharing it would seem a little bit sort of hollow, I guess.
Sharing it would suck.
Yeah.
Sharing it would be a really, really poor outcome.
Yeah. So I think there's some format issues that,
absolutely.
that play into this.
Yeah, absolutely. There's flaws in the format. Teams don't play each other twice, home and away.
Yep.
Teams don't play the same number of tests, either in series or in total. There's heaps of flaws in this format. It's better than it was last time, I think, insofar as the point scoring is slightly more balanced than it was previously. But, there's still flaws in the format, not least of which is that there's no benefit for finishing top of the table in this kind of league thing.
It's not like the Sheffield Shield, is it? Where if you go in number one on the ladder and it's a draw, then you
get home and all you need is first innings in the Sheffield Shield. So it's up to the team, basically the team finishing second.
Do you even need first innings?
You need first innings, yeah.
But has that changed recently? Because it used to be a draw would have seen you win the Sheffield Shield if you were going in as the team at the top of the table, wouldn't it?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll check that. I'll fact check that and come back to you. But I thought you still needed first innings. I know that the team finishing second definitely needs to win outright.
Yeah.
Anyway, the team finishing second needs to do something to advance the game because they finish second, all we want is a draw. It's at a neutral venue. There's no advantage to the team finishing first, and that's yet another problem. So, it's a flawed system, but I think we do have probably on balance of the full 2.5 years, 2 years, whatever it is, the two most consistent teams. They're not the form team in world cricket. Well, I think we'd all agree that England is the form team in world cricket at the moment, but unfortunately for them, their first 12 months couldn't allow them to capitalise on their second 12 months.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about that a little bit in that and how ridiculous this turnaround has been for England. I will sort of give my own 2 cents worth on what this means for India and their fans. And I think this is really important for them. I know that India, we talk about India as the biggest nation and all that kind of stuff, but they haven't won a world title for quite a long time. It's been 2011 since the 50 over World Cup. I think they won the Champions Trophy in 2013 maybe. But since then, there's been a lot of runners-up and a lot of, semi-finals.
There's been a lot of disappointment for Indian fans. A lot of what they would perceive to be underachievement. I think Indian fans still think that they underachieved in the last World Test Championship final, where they were beaten by New Zealand.
Yeah.
They were beaten pretty comprehensively, to be fair. But, I think Indian fans would have thought we should win this game. And I think Indian fans will go into this game expecting to beat Australia.
Yeah.
So I've just checked on the Sheffield Shield. So it is first innings. It didn't used to be first innings. So we were kind of along the right lines. But let's come back before we sort of move on and preview the two teams for this. And, do English conditions in the Duke's ball suit X or Y? Bordy, let's come back to that question. So Ashes or winning the World Test Championship final, what would be the, I guess, the ideal for you? And clearly it's going to be both. But if it could only be one, which would it be?
Well, and I think this is the problem for me because I am a bit of a traditionalist and I'm a traditionalist's traditionalist in that I would rather Australia, particularly having not won it for a while in England, win the Ashes in England. It would be a bitter pill to swallow if we were to lose to India. But if we beat England away in this particular summer, given the strength of the English side and their strength at home and the fact that we haven't won away for such a long period of time, I would take winning the Ashes over winning the World Test Championship this time around. Ordinarily speaking, I think lots of fans would take a mace, take a gong, take the silverware. But in this particular instance, this Ashes series coming up, as we'll talk about in our preview show in a couple of weeks, means a lot to Australian fans.
Well, and I think that's a reflection. I don't say this in a mean, vindictive way, but I think that's a reflection of Australia's won a lot of titles. Like for New Zealand, winning that World Test Championship meant absolutely everything, because we just don't have those ICC, the amount of gongs that you guys have, and so. Yeah, that's why I said I think India, it's possibly more valuable to them to win this.
And look, I'm coming at it from a very, very biased point of view in that I value the Ashes series as a very, very important pinnacle of Australian Test cricket achievement, one that is very traditional, that goes back 100 years or more, etc., etc. So, the World Test Championship is also very, very new, all that. It doesn't have quite the same amount of history. I'm not underestimating or making excuses in advance or anything like that. That's just my point of view.
Yeah, and look, I'm glad you kind of came round on that point from a New Zealand perspective. That for you, for a New Zealander, it's the pinnacle.
Absolutely.
For me as an Englishman, if we were in this final and the Ashes followed it afterwards, 100%, I would want to win the Ashes more than even though it's the culmination of 4 years. I'd rather be one of the best two teams in the world at a given point and then win the biggest bilateral series. And I think if it was England versus India in a series, a 5-match series, I'd say exactly the same thing. Probably, if it was England-West Indies or England-Pakistan, then, that would probably be a bit more of a conversation. But I think when you've got a scenario, I think, where you would trade off a bilateral series win for the World Test Championship, there's something not quite right from a format and a kudos perspective.
Agreed.
Let's come on to the two teams. We'll start with Australia, because I think Australia. Some news broke today that Josh Hazlewood is out of the squad for the World Test Championship. Michael Neser, who's been playing some county cricket and been going pretty well actually,
he's been smashing it in county cricket
for Glamorgan, I think, has come into the squad. Probably will be harsh if he comes into the starting 11 ahead of the world's best bowler, Scotty Boland. But in terms of that, that Australia team, if we just go back and look at, because this will be a 30-second segment otherwise.
I would say so.
But if we go back and look at Australia versus India in Ahmedabad, the final test of that series that took place in the winter, where, as you said, Buddy, you got your arses handed to you. Warner was injured, wasn't he, I think, for that final test?
Yes,
so you had Head Khawaja, Labuschagne Smith, Peter Hanscom, Cameron Green, Alex Carey, Stark, Lyon, Murphy and Kuhnemann. So I think if you kind of look at that as the last test match that you played, it's pretty obvious, I think, where you're going to go in terms of the next sort of 3 or 4 days. But any permutations that you think the selectors are thinking about leading into the game, or is it as simple as 6 batters, including Cameron Green, Carey at 7, and then Boland comes in for Hazlewood, and you've got Stark and Cummins?
I think that's going to be the outcome that the Australian selectors will reach. I think there's a genuine conversation about what does Michael Neser offer in terms of his additional batting. If you have a look at Australia's going to need every possible advantage that they can get to win this test match. India are a very, very good side. They have got some real X factor in their team, still even in English conditions, and we'll get into that as we come to the kind of keys to victory. But I think Australia will very strongly consider Michael Neser's form with bat and ball, and then they'll choose Scott Boland. The reason I think that they'll choose Scott Boland is because he actually solves a bit of a problem that Australia had when Hazlewood was in the side, and that is, what do they do with their opening bowling combination and what do they do with Mitchell Starc? I think having Scott Boland come in and bowl really, really tight lines and nip the ball about a bit and keep batters honest, I think actually does Australia a bit of a favour. I think they should open with Scott Boland, have him bowl 3 or 4 overs up front, really, really tight lines, try and make the Indian openers play every single ball that they can in those first 18 to 24 deliveries that he gives them. The lacquer wears off the ball a little bit, and then they give it to Mitchell Starc, and he does what he normally does in Australian conditions, which is run in and try and swing the ball from ball 1. What that gives me is we're not letting the batters off the hook in their first 10 deliveries by having them either not play balls and leave them go and get good sighters, or get bad balls if Stark is not 100% on the money and then hit the ball for 4. There's a bit of pressure building with Scott Boland there, and then Stark can come in. As soon as the ball starts to swing, it gets into Stark's hand and he starts targeting the stumps. I really like that from an Australian combination point of view.
Yeah, and look, I think playing with the Duke's cricket ball, which I think I mentioned earlier on, I think that plays into that plan's hands as well, because the Dukes will swing for a little bit longer than the Kookaburra. Normally Kookaburra would go for the first 10 overs,
and then it goes quiet.
Whereas you've got that opportunity, literally 2 bites of that cherry.
Stark is in the game for longer in England, and it means that he doesn't have to take the first ball and do his damage in the first 2 or 3 overs of his spell to be effective in English conditions.
Cool. Let's move on and talk about India's permutations, and we'll come back and talk some other talking points as well. We've got to go into detail probably about keepers and David Warner's lap of honour and a few other bits and pieces as well.
Yep.
But if we start with the same premise as India in India, so the side that they picked for that 4th test in Ahmedabad against Australia, Sharma, Gill, Pujara, Kohli, then 2 spinners, Jadeja and Patel, split by the keeper, Shrikar Bharat. We got Ravi Ashwin as well, so a 3rd spinning option, an all-rounder option. And then the 3 seamers, Yadav, Shami and Shreyas Iyer. I guess the notable thing there is how high Ravi Jadeja's batting in that order.
Well, he batted up because
Shreyas Iyer was injured.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And then if we kind of look at the England Test match last summer, so they finished off that series. Gill, Pujara, Vihari, who won't play, Kohli, Pant, who won't play, Iyer,
who won't play,
Jadeja, Thakur, Shami, Bumrah, who won't play, and then Siraj down at the bottom. So we've got probably a few more questions around India, particularly those permutations in probably whether or not they managed to get Ashwin and Jadeja. Is Axar a question there as well? How you get him in the side? I probably don't think so. No. We then got Ishan Kishan and Bharat. And I think if you kind of look at how they might need to balance that side, it probably leans towards Kishan playing ahead of Bharat, doesn't it, from a batting perspective?
I was thinking the same thing. And I've sort of gone through all these permutations in my head. I mean, actually, if you look at I went back and looked at the last World Championship Final, World Test Championship Final, and many of those players are very much the same. Their lineup then was Rohit, Gill, Pujara, Kohli, Rahane, which may well be the top 5.
I think that will be their top 5.
Again, and then you go Pant, Jadeja, Ashwin, Ishant, Bumrah, Shami. So, a few changes. Obviously, Pant changes, and then you go into a few different changes with the bowlers. But Shami, Ashwin, Jadeja, it's very, very similar. And I think I sort of started questioning, could you play Jadeja at 5 to kind of get your, in the batting lineup to sort of get your 2 spinners in there? And then you have... Because basically, these days I almost feel like there's enough runs going around in Test cricket, and actually sometimes bowling is the hardest thing. I mean, I'm just sort of thinking back to the New Zealand summer, even some of the conditions there where England just stood there and smashed it at various times. And you sit there and watch England play at the moment, and batting looks very easy. Even Ireland, when they were out to bat, sometimes made it look quite simple at times. And then you go and think, well, what we need to do is to be able to get 20 wickets. And if they play Jadeja at 5, who I think I went back and looked, he's averaged 42 with the bat since 2016. So it's not like... So, I mean, we've talked about him as, world's best all-rounder, even plus all the plus-minus stats that you've done. I mean, he's right up there with the best in the world.
He is a thorn in Australia's side, Ravindra Jadeja. He and Ravichandran Ashwin both are thorns in Australia's side. I had them down here in my hastily scribbled notes prior to recording as being the keys to India's victory, both with the ball and also with the bat. They have managed to, and I don't know if this is just my biased recollection of the scorecards, but I feel like every time we play India, we have India 4 or 5 for as much as we want them to be, and then one of those two or both and or Axar gets 80 and looks impenetrable, and India end up with a match-winning first innings total. So if I was India, I would be not banking on those two to make runs, but I would be having both of them play, regardless of where they play in front of Ishan Kishan or behind Ishan Kishan. Like Jadeja and Ashwin at 7 and 8 is a really, really handy combination of bowling capability in all conditions and also allows them to have effectively 3 number 11s at 9, 10, 11. And if they play Thakur, then they give them a little bit more punch. But if they play Unadkat and Siraj and Shami, then they're going to have, 3 pretty number 11-ish number 11s at 9, 10, 11.
Well, and I think it's probably more likely, to be Umesh Yadav.
Yes, actually,
that's
he's
the seamer
the
that
one
probably
they
comes in
forward,
and be that, third or fourth seamer, depending on what you class Shardul Thakur. But
So you think you go Shami, Thakur and
I think
Yadav?
Shakur will play just the way that they want to balance their side. And you just in terms of all of I often go and look around at the articles and things because you can't always glean everything from that, but there's always comments from the camp and things. And I don't know, everything seems to me to be pointing that Thakur will play, and maybe the decision is based around should we play an extra third seam or an extra seamer in Yadav, or do we play Ashwin as well? It still boggles my mind that Ashwin can be considered not to play, but we saw when they went over and played against England, there were a number of games that he didn't play in those conditions. And even thinking back to that World Test Championship final last time around, Jadeja was pretty much a non-event with the ball. Ashwin bowled very, very well in that game.
That's the thing, right? Like, honestly, if you give Australia 6 bowlers from which India has to pick 5, Ravindra and Ashwin is probably the first bowler that Australia will go, we're happy not to face him.
Yeah.
Really? Like, they are the keys to victory. If Australia are to win this World Test Championship, as you said, both of those guys have to be a non-factor with bat and ball. And if they don't pick them, like, I just don't see Umesh, and I'm obviously going to be wrong saying this, right? And I'm sure that having said it, Umesh Yadav is going to, get 8 or 9 for the match and bowl India to victory. But I just can't, if that's what wins India the World Test Championship final, then kudos to them. Because if you look at their side and the strengths that they have, you would expect their victory to come from Ashwin and Yadav, their best 2 bowlers, bowling the majority of their overs and or getting the majority of their wickets and putting Australia under some real pressure.
Yeah, well, and I think, I also think those 2 seamers up front, Shami and Siraj as well, are pretty crucial in that. But just before we kind of move on to all of that kind of stuff, you talked about the keepers before. I had the same thought, like if they're going to... Basically, playing Kishan gives them a bit more opportunity to potentially, weaken their batting lineup if you want by picking more bowlers.
Yeah.
But actually, when you go and I think partly that's because in your head, Ishan Kishan's been playing IPL, scoring runs, bats at the top of the order, smashes it around in white ball cricket. If you actually look at their first class records, I was very surprised to see that he averages 38 with the bat in first class cricket. Bharat averages 37. It's not like there's a huge difference there. Yes, we see now, like Rahane's got himself back in form by playing T20 cricket.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Bharat has hardly been playing. Kishan's been playing IPL at the high, sort of that high pressure environment, scoring, starting to get into a bit of form, looking good again. I don't know. I think it's just... It's a different sort of conversation than I thought. I kind of just assumed in my head, Ishan Kishan's the better batter. If you want to play him... One-off game,
yeah.
He gives you more options. But, yeah, I don't know. I think it's a toss of the coin, to be quite honest.
Yeah, well, who knows? I mean, I think I've written in my notes that I've got Kishan playing. I think it gives the ability, and I think, again, white ball form is playing an important factor in this. We've had some question marks about David Warner before the IPL. He's actually had a pretty decent
reasonable tournament,
pretty decent IPL. What do you make, Baldy? Because I think we've sort of sorted out the fact that we're flipping a coin on a couple of decisions in that Indian side, whether or not probably they go with Thakur or whether they potentially go with Yadav. Rahane's nailed on to bat 5, we think.
I would think so.
I think the only option that he doesn't is if they go with Jadeja at 5 and then just stack
the bowlers.
With 6 bowlers. Then
stack it with all your all rounders and have Ashwin and Thakur and Jadeja all in the mix there and play Kishan, and sort of you have a lot of bit part players that can get you down to about 8. And I mean, that, to be honest, that might still be enough. But yeah.
Well, let's see what happens at the toss in a few days' time. But, Baldy, let's move on and talk about David Warner. Some comments from him. He's announced his victory lap pretty early. So he wants to bow out at the Sydney Cricket Ground in Australian summer.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think it's it's a real difficult one, isn't it? We look back into Australian cricket, let alone world cricket, and there's been some players that would have loved to have bowed out on their home turf. I go back, from a selfish perspective. I look at Ian Healy. I would have liked one more game in Brisbane, wouldn't he? But they brought Gilchrist in. He got 87 and a leg side stumping on debut, and no one ever really looked back. So I guess in terms of Warner's comments, do you think that just probably gives him a little bit more pressure, which might help him through the last 6 or 7 games of his career potentially?
Yeah, it puts the Australian selectors in a bit of an envious position as well. He's basically said, I'm playing the rest of this
That's what I was
Ashes
thinking.
and also the Australian summer. Great. If he's going to make runs, fantastic. But if he goes through the English summer and this World Test Championship final and he scores 120 runs in 10 or 11 bats and doesn't really trouble the scorers too much, it's a bit of a tough question to say, well, do you get the whole Australian summer, which is a big Australian summer too, by the way. We're not playing mug sides down in Australia over that summer period. To give him another 10 bats down in Australia, like he's basically said, I want 22 more innings, please, and then I'll retire. He's going to have to score some runs at some point. And he's going to have to score some runs in that English series. In his mind, does that give him some clarity? I hope so. I hope that what he has done is given himself some clarity and a runway to go, right, I've got this much time left. I'm going to be really decisive in what I do in that period, because if he is decisive, he's often a better cricketer for it. He's often a better cricketer when he's up for the fight, when he feels like he's got some kind of something going against him or someone is antagonising him or he's got a point to prove. And if his point to prove is I'm going to show everyone that I'm still as good at whatever he is, 36, 37, 30-something, as I was at 20-something, then great. But, it will be an interesting conversation if after 3 test matches in the Ashes, Broad's gone through him 5 times and he's not gone past 20. That will be a really, really interesting conversation. And then the conversation becomes, well, if not him, then who?
A couple more points before we come on to predictions. Let's talk about, we mentioned the Duke's cricket ball. Who do we think that favours leading into this game, one-off game?
I think immediately your thought process goes, well, it favours not India. Like traditionally, that's the thought that comes. But I think they've shown over so many, it's actually sort of almost 10 years now, I think, of the way that their cricket's developed and the way they've been going overseas, starting with Dhoni, and into Kohli's captaincy, going overseas, winning Test series. They're a good bowling side, and the guys I just mentioned before, Siraj and Shami. I know we're talking about white ball formats, but they were the form, I think, if they weren't the top 2 seamers by form, and I don't know what they finished up with wickets-wise in terms of the actual pure numbers, but just from looking at them bowling, the way that they run in, they knock off the top, and I don't think that changes. Like, yes, it's a different format. Yes, they're trying to bowl different areas perhaps, but they still, in the T20 format, that's their job, to go on and take wickets early on, particularly Siraj, and he did that tremendously well. And I mean, he led that RCB attack, and then the rest of them were pretty average, and that's kind of what fell away from them. But those two with the Duke's ball, Shami in particular, the seam position is the thing that you always think about with him, and it just some of the balls that he bowled, actually, obviously I'm going to bring it back to that Southampton game. This brings back all those memories. I remember that second innings of that. He came on to bowl a spell and it just swung miles. And this was like 20, 30 overs into that innings. And he was still that same position, just hits it and it just goes. And even after it hits the pitch. So, he's going to be a real handful if the conditions are right for him.
The name that immediately I circled on my little bit of paper here was Mohammad Shami, because of his seam presentation. He presents the seam as perfectly, in air quotes, and I use those air quotes advisedly, as any bowler in world cricket. However, I think for them to be successful, they're also going to have to master the Jimmy Anderson wobble seam, right? They're going to have to use all of their skill to present both the perfect seam that will swing effectively out of the hand and also the wobble seam that will swing late or pitch and net, those kinds of skills. I think that they are perfectly suited, Siraj and Shami, to execute and exploit those kinds of skills. If you ask the man on the street, who does this favour, the Duke's cricket ball, Cummins and Stark and co, or Siraj and Shami, I think most people would pick the Australian bowlers.
Yeah.
I actually think it's a lot closer than a lot of people think. And I think that India don't lose much having the Duke's cricket ball as opposed to the ball that they play with and the conditions they play with in India. So I don't think that the Duke's ball favours Australia as much as Australians would like to think, and as much as you look at it on paper and the quality of Stark, Cummins, Boland would make it appear.
And on conditions, I mean, what does the Oval have to offer us in terms of, I went back and looked at a couple of the recent first-class games, but you've probably got a much better idea of generally what the Oval offers to international sides coming to visit there.
Yeah, look, I think historically, and I'll come onto the pitch and the conditions in a sec, but I think just from a Duke's ball perspective, as we finish up on that point, I've got a slightly different take on it, which is less about the bowlers and more about the batters. So I think if we go back, it's got to be probably, I'll get the years wrong, so drop a note in the comments if I get this horribly wrong, but I think Virat Kohl came over 2010 to England and basically didn't score a run in a test series there, and I think made it his mission that he wanted to come back and actually prove that he could bat against that moving ball. And I think it would have been 2013-14 India came back and had a pretty good showing in the test matches there, and I think the same with the likes of Rahane, the likes of Rohit Sharma, the likes of Pujara, who has come over and played a lot of county cricket.
And he's been great.
And has been
really successful.
Absolutely fantastic. So I actually think that the Indian batters have actually learned. I think historically, if you go back 10, 15 years, there was always this, India and Pakistan don't do well when they play in seaming or bouncing conditions, whether that's South Africa, England, Australia.
New Zealand. We've done we've done India with a few nice pitches.
But I think they've put that to bed. So I think from a batting perspective, it's a little bit closer. Clearly, Australia have had some success with Labuschagne and Smith coming over and playing some county cricket and probably getting a few.
Have they scored runs?
Labuschagne scored some runs. Smith got one score, I think, and a couple of, he'll say, dodgy LBs. So I don't really care about that.
One of them looked pretty dodgy to me.
It did, but who cares? Read the scorebook. So I actually think, on balance, it might actually just, when we look at the ball being relatively even in terms of the impact of that Dukes, I think it's the batting that I would say India might slightly shade it. From a conditions perspective, the Oval always used to be the track that might turn later in the summer, but that's typically that the Oval is the last test match in August or even early September. Playing, I think, in this part of the year, the early part of the summer, I think what you're going to find is a pretty flat, easy paced pitch. I don't expect it to turn a whole heap. So look, I think it will be a relatively flat. I wouldn't necessarily say placid, that you do get a little bit more carry at the Oval than potentially somewhere like Lord's, but I don't think it's going to really play into the hands of it's sort of turning into a Bunsen burner on day 4 and day 5. Bordy, let's come on to predictions. So we'll kind of give a little bit of a view on whether we think it's going to be a draw and we share the mace, or whether we think there's enough in it to predict a winner coming into this World Test Championship final. I might leave you with a final word, actually. Okay, we'll come to Lippy first.
I'm finding it quite hard to split these teams. I think when you go and look at this game, I do think there'll be a winner, mainly just because kind of Test cricket, there is always a winner now. I mean, I'd be very surprised the way that things are going. It'd have to be really, really placid for to not be. And I don't see that happening. I sort of think that, I don't know. Very, very different conditions, but that last World Test Championship final, 249 was the highest score in the game. And obviously it was a lot of rain around, the ball swung. Yeah. Different kind of conditions.
Different venue.
Yeah, different venue. But even you look at I mentioned those games, the first class games at the Oval, the last couple of games, it's been, total innings scores has been 420 in one game, 453 in the other. No one really getting more than 300, 250. Yes, very. It's going to be very different caliber of players. But I find it really hard to split them. I think probably I would go Australia, but just like very, very narrowly. I think a lot is going to come down to whether Siraj and Shami can take early wickets. I think if they don't, it's going to be pretty hard going for India. And Smith, Labuschagne, Head's someone who, he just burst out in that Australian summer, didn't he? And then there was all the questions of what on earth are they doing not picking him in those India games over there, and lots and lots of debate were around him. But it seemed like he was someone who kind of knew his game now. And if he's coming to, I know he opened in those games, started opening after Warner got injured, but if he can come in basically like he did in the Australian summer, if they can set the platform for him, the likes of Head, the likes of Green and Carey, if they can come in with a platform, they're the kind of players that can take the game away. And whereas India without Rishabh Pant, he was that player, wasn't he? He was that player that could come in and just take the game away from the other side if they were well placed. Now I think for India, a lot rides on Pujara and Kohli, kind of in that 3 and 4 in the same way, but then I don't know that they have quite the kick on. I think those two would have to get big scores.
Yeah, so you're going with Australia.
I'm narrowly shading it to Australia.
So I'm going to assume Baldy's going to go with India because that's what he'll do, right?
Yeah,
so he'll do the kidology piece.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, I think if you'd have taken this back 3 or 4 years, I would have 100% said that I think that Australia are better prepared because they've got the likes of Labuschagne, the likes of Smith, the likes of Nisa, whether he plays or not. But, some guys that have played a lot of cricket in England, in county cricket particularly, and a couple of guys on the ground that are probably used to conditions. But I think if we look at what's happened over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen players come straight out of the IPL into big test match series and absolutely carve it up. And I think if I, look through that Indian lineup, Shubman Gill's had an amazing IPL. Virat Kohli's had an amazing IPL.
Throw Rahane in there.
We look at Rahane's had a pretty good IPL. Shami's had a pretty good IPL.
Yes,
Jadeja's had a very good IPL. With
certainly the last few moments
with the silverware. So, and I actually think that based on all of that, the fact that Smith and Labuschagne might have a few sort of clues around the English conditions in their head. But again, as I said, I do think there's a difference between first-class pitches in not only England, but first-class pitches and test match pitches. And let's remember as well that the ICC are in charge of this pitch. So, whilst clearly it's the groundsman at the Oval, that's a curator in Australia.
Thanks very much.
They'll have been given some pretty clear instructions, I think, on what that's going to look like. And it will be a pitch that I think will last 5 days. Yeah. And, as you said, I think we'll see a result. And I'm going to go with India. I think they're going to shade it based on the fact that they've got a lot of what Raj would call momentum going into this game, probably more so than Australia for me.
Don't get me wrong. I wanted India to win.
Yeah, there we go.
just as we lead into your comments.
So Baldy, over
to you,
Baldy. Other than India winning it, where are you going?
Keys to victory for me are Australia need to post a really big first innings score and put India out of the game. The longer this game goes on, the more and more I think it favours India. When it gets close, India have a belief that they can beat Australia because they've done it before in their home conditions and in Australian conditions. The longer this game goes on, I think the more and more chance that it gets towards a fourth innings where Ravindra Jadeja and Ravichandran Ashwin become pivotal to India's success. So for me, Australia on days 1, 2 and 3 have to put themselves in front in the first innings by a reasonably big margin. If they can do that, I think Australia can win. But if it is even Stevens after the first innings, I think India are going to be mentally and also physically in front from that point. And I think if it's close in the first innings, India will win.
I do just to add.
Just hold on, because if you're not noticed, I know you're keen to jump in, but you haven't answered the question.
Damn it! I was hoping that you wouldn't notice. Look, I actually think Australia will win this game.
Oh, you beauty!
I think we will. I think that Australia will win this game. I think it will be very, very, very close. But I think Australia have enough in that batting lineup that if they can get big first innings runs, then Australia can put the Indian batters under pressure. And unless Jadeja and Ashwin get big scores somewhere, first or second innings, Australia have the formula and the batters to be able to make a success of it.
It's taken, 4 years? 4 years for him to predict to actually back a team with his heart.
Hooray.
So I think we've got to end the segment on that. So we are going to go with a 2-1 majority. Raj not here to plead his case. So you heard it here first, viewers. Get your money.
On India.
On India, clearly. But Australia 2-1 from the top order panel for the World Test Championship final, which starts a little bit later this week at the Kennington Oval.
Good odds on India too to win. 270 you can get on India to win. Draw 550.
There you go. Well, we're back, boys. We're going
are.
to talk a little bit of England, Ireland. So we will do a preview of the Ashes series coming up. So whilst there's probably some talking points that sort of lead into that Ashes series, I think what we really want to talk about is this Test match, 4-day Test match. Look, I guess really I'm interested in a little bit like we talked about the interest in the World Test Championship final, just really what the interest in this Test match really is outside of an England cricket fan or an Ireland cricket fan. England are, a pretty handsome victory by 10 wickets. If it wasn't for some lusty blows at the end of the Ireland second innings from Mark Adair and Andy McBride, both, mid-80s or thereabouts, it would have been an innings victory for England. And as it was, Zach Crawley came out and hit 3 of his first 4 balls for 4 in, as he's wont to do to get England to that 10-wicket win pretty comfortably. But yeah, any thoughts really from the neutral?
I think when I was watching the parts that I saw of this game live, and then you see the comments and stuff from Balbirnie afterwards, I sort of just felt for Ireland. Like, I think we talked about it a little bit last week, and they've almost just been thrown to the wolves. I mean, like, in the sense that they've got bigger fish to fry coming up in a couple of weeks with this ICC tournament to get into the ODI World Cup. They've, got Josh Little on the sidelines. They haven't played first-class cricket in Ireland since COVID, like that just hasn't been on offer to them. So they're just not equipped to go into a test match against a side that's the form side of the world at the moment, the way that they're playing, and just equip themselves in the way that they might want to. And I don't know whether that we just go, okay, well, this was just circumstances, or is this a red flag that we go, oh dear, this is like a big concern for Test cricket, and actually, what does this actually mean? Can we grow the game? And all, I think all of that feels like a big overreaction, and
yes, it is.
And they've just been thrown to the wolves in this game, and it hasn't gone especially well.
If we measured every cricket nation by whether or not they get beaten by this England side, and England side puts 500 on them, there'd be a lot of Test cricket sides that wouldn't be playing any more Test cricket. West Indies and New Zealand would be amongst them. Australia are just about to be amongst those as well.
Hey, we not drawn series over from New Zealand.
Well, true. However, there are circumstances that are conspiring against Ireland, if you like, but Irish never use that as an excuse, right? They're not a nation of people that make excuses. They're not a nation of people that would hide behind excuses as a result of their performance. Ireland probably haven't acquitted themselves as well as they would have liked. Certain individuals in that team haven't stepped up and performed as well as they'd like to, but this is a very, very, very good English side. And for them, this is the ultimate hit out in preparation for the Ashes. I want to come to Adam with a bit of a question around what you saw from their bowlers, because that was the thing for me that most impressed me in this particular Test match. Sometimes batters are a bit rusty, and that's okay. You get a good ball, you nick off or what have you. But England's bowlers were absolutely on the money, and Ireland made them work hard in the second innings. So they got a really good hit out. This, to me, is a perfect hit out Test match for England's bowlers in the lead up to the Ashes.
Yeah, I think if I look at a hit out for the bowlers, yeah, absolutely. Realistically, though, are we going to see too much of Matthew Potts and Josh Tongue in the first couple of games? Look, with some injury worries now, that probably makes it more likely than it was 3 or 4 days ago that you might see potentially Josh Tongue in that game at Edgbaston. Look, not surprisingly, I've got a slightly different take on it. I think it was a relatively flat wicket, and I actually had some concerns, when McBride and Adair are slapping round your attack, leading into a series where you've got the likes of Travis Head and Cameron Green and Alex Carey and down the order, I'm talking about the guys that can really take a game away if you set some kind of reasonable platform. It did concern me that we looked a little bit one-dimensional. Probably the positive that I'll take from it is, Potts, particularly in the second innings, he bowled a fantastic spell early up, I think on would have been the third morning. The ball was wobbling around a little bit. He was bowling the kind of lines and lengths that I think, the Ireland guys just weren't good enough to nick off to. And I think the likes of, Smith and Labuschagne probably would have been good enough to get an edge on some of the balls in that spell. And then again, look, personally, Again, this is around the way that Brendan McCullum and Ben Stokes want to play their cricket. Josh Tongue was sitting on 4 wickets. He's got an opportunity to take 5 wickets on debut, and they kind of went, we want you to bowl 3 or 4 overs of bumpers here. Yeah. When, he'd bowled a really, really good full pitch up spell. I'd have been kind of going to the skipper, hey, I'm on a 5 for here. Let me do what I'm successful at. But they wanted to see whether or not he had that dimension in his armoury. And I think, proved that he did have enough pace to rough up again some Ireland batters. So there's a couple of positives that I'll take from it. I think Australia were always going to get after whichever spinner England pick, and that would have been Jack Leach. Unfortunately, he's now got a stress factor in the lower back. So we'll come on to the permutations there. I think in terms of who might come in for him from a spin perspective, I think they'll pick a spinner, whether they play one or whether they go with 5 seamers. We'll maybe talk about in a little bit more detail next week. But I do think this comes back to Ireland for me, and they seemed only to be able to counter-attack. They took their white ball credentials, with the exception of James McCollum, who I thought played really, really well in that first innings for 36, and then gave it away after he'd done, the old
He'd
cliche.
Be disappointed.
He'd done all of the hard work. The wicket was flat. He'd let the ball come to him. He'd played really, really late. He'd put anything with width away. He'll be disappointed. But if it wasn't for a bit of that counter attack from Sterling, and then in that second innings from Adair and from McBride, then there's not a massive amount of positives. And I think from a bowling perspective, it sounds really, really harsh, but that they looked like a decent second division county attack at best through the course of that game. So, but I think you alluded to it, Stu. This is a hell of a lot about the first class setup that they don't currently have. Yeah. The fact that their county guys aren't able to play county cricket anymore because
the lack of Cole
because they're overseas players now. So it's got to be a question for the ICC around what do they want for those guys that were associate nations that they've now put some investment into to get 10, 11, 12 teams at full test status. What do they want from those teams? Because I can see Ireland saying, do you know what, we don't really care about this. We're going to care about
we need some support.
The 2 big white ball tournaments, I think.
Yeah. Were you surprised that they didn't give Harry Brook a knock? I mean, I was sitting there thinking, geez, I wonder if they'll go for 1,000 here. But obviously the draw of golf, is golf that fun? Like they just seem to want to finish the game early so that they can play golf. I'm not a big golfer, but is it that fun? You guys love golf?
Johnny Bairstow would say not. Many other England players.
He didn't get a hit really either, so yeah.
No, but Brook's been out of form is more what I was thinking. Like, I kind of thought, obviously those guys just bet Duckett and Pope just kind of took that out of his hands, and they had enough, clearly. But I kind of thought maybe they'd give him, see if he could get to 50 or something, kind of just to get him back in the swing of things before the Ashes.
Yeah, I just don't think that they think like that anymore. I just think that they want to entertain, and I think that had been a criticism that 500 runs was enough, and why are we batting on here? This is not the way that we play cricket. We look at scoring our runs as quickly as we can, and we look at taking our wickets as quickly as we can, and that didn't fit into that game plan. So I don't think you are going to see this England side at any point get someone into form or arguably get someone to a personal milestone or any of the kind of things that we associate with traditional Test cricket. They're going to do what they want to do in order to score runs at 6 and a bit and over. And again, don't really care about runs in terms of wicket taking either. You look at Paul Sterling came in, and normally if you go back a year or 18 months, Jack Leach would have had 3, 4, 5 men out on that leg side for the sweep, and they just went, nah, you'll hit one in the air eventually, or you'll chop one on, or you'll pop one up, and sure enough he did. So I just don't think that they have that mentality anymore.
Mm-hmm. The thing that struck me, talking about that, and I mean, you guys just alluded to the strike rates and all that kind of thing, and Duckett obviously scored a truckload of runs just then, and the stat that I saw throughout that I just thought was amazing, and I don't know what it ended up being, but he has left the ball 8 times in his last. Well, I think it was as an opener, he had left the ball 8 times out of 605 balls, and I just kind of thought, what is going on? Like you get so many wide deliveries even as an opener in a. How has that even happened? But then I kind of think back to when he was here, and that was the thing that struck me the most, that he's just scoring all the time or just playing shots all the time.
He hits every ball. Look, let's not get into the Ashes preview, because this is not the Ashes preview, but it makes for a fascinating battle, I think, with those Australian bowlers, particularly Cummins, who likes to have a player kind of leave, must play, that kind of thing. Look, let's focus on this test match, because Duckett and Pope were fantastic for England. All their batters were outstanding, I think. It doesn't leave Bairstow or Brook with a lot of form going into the next test matches, but look, ticks all up and down the order for England. I was particularly impressed with their bowlers, because having been put under pressure, they've now got some A, miles in their legs, and B, they were able to respond and bowl Ireland out, even though Ireland will put them under pressure. I think they'll be better for that in many ways, which to me, if I was England, I'd be like, good, we've been given a test. Ireland punched us in the mouth a bit. Now we know what that's going to be like. We are better prepared for that, and we are mentally prepared, particularly guys like Potts and Tongue, who haven't played a lot of test cricket, to be prepared to be in the dirt for a day. Like, now they've got that experience, and when it happens to them at some point in this Ashes series, they'll get a go. Both of them, at least one of them, I think, possibly both of them will get a go at some point. They'll at least have those miles under their legs. So I'm seeing that as a really, really good thing.
It is an enviable position, I think. I mean, you talked last week about the pecking order, I guess, of all those seamers, and you listed off 11 names. I think you got to in the end.
4 of them are injured.
I know, but again, putting it back to a New Zealand perspective, we had a couple of injuries, and suddenly it was like, oh my word, people around New Zealand were going, who have we got playing Test cricket? What is going on here? And now England are just bringing it, like, it seems like there is just a factory of these seamers. And, Tongue comes in, bowls,
91 miles an hour.
90 miles an hour. Look, the goods. I saw a fantastic Derek Pringle tweet that said, what did he say? Ireland licked by Tongue, which made me chuckle. And he's just coming in and doing the business. And, I guess, we've already just talked about Ireland weren't, well equipped for this game necessarily, but I think it's a huge positive that England can just keep bringing in. Potts was the one last summer that came in, did the business.
2 years ago it was Ollie Robinson. 3 years ago maybe.
Yeah, and Joffre before that. So there is a real quality seam attack, and I don't know. I don't know. It starts to get to the point of I don't know who you start to pick, and you're pretty well equipped for when Anderson and Broad, if they ever do disappear off into
that's 4 or 5 years
into the
away
sunset.
That's a long time away yet before they retire.
Well, look, I'm sure we could chat about that all night. We will
could
chat more of it on the Ashes preview next week. But for now, it is going to be good night and God bless from us all here in Auckland. We will be back in your feeds with a review of this World Test Championship final, Ashes preview next week. We've got Cricketing Hall of Fame, and then Test matches back to back for about the next 13 weeks or something like that. So stay tuned into the feed. But for now, as I said, it's good night and God bless from us all here in Auckland. We'll see you soon. Good night.